2BC. Welcome back to our study of the book of Acts. We will be continuing with Peter's story this week as we look at Acts 12. Now, Acts 12 opens with a new wave of persecution breaking out against the church. And King Herod is mentioned as one of the main instigators. Verse 1 says that he arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. Now, this King Herod is Herod Agrippa I, and he was born around 10 BC and raised in Rome. He would have been the grandson of Herod the Great. He was a friend of a couple men who would become Caesars, Gaius and Claudius. And his sister was Herodias. If you remember Herodias, she's the one who married Herod Antipas, who John the Baptist said, "You can't do that," and was involved in the whole beheading of John the Baptist and all of that. So this King Herod was Herodias' brother, and he reigned for a short period of time from 37 to 43 AD. And he had a rather large kingdom, but he had a very short rule. And he was granted the title of king from the Emperor Claudius, who, remember I said, was one of his childhood friends. The Jewish historian Josephus mentions him and describes him in a positive light because he followed the law and treated foreigners well and had a mild temperament, yet he definitely was not kind to followers of Jesus, as we are about to see. So one of the first people that is mentioned here that he arrests is James. Verse 2 says, he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. So this is James, son of Zebedee and John's brother. And he, with the sword, means that he was probably beheaded. So if you look with me real quickly back at Mark 10, you remember how Jesus says to James and John, whenever they come to him. So look at Mark 10, verses 38 and 39. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, had come to him and ask him, we want you to do what we ask you to do, whatever we ask. And he says, what do you want me to do for you? And they ask if they could sit on his right and left. And he says, you don't know what you're asking. This is verse 38. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? And they said, we can. And he said, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. And so we see that here with James being beheaded. He is the first of the disciples to be martyred. And this action that Herod takes, having James arrested and then killed, wins him favor from the Jews. And he likes this approval, so he decides to go even further. And so he arrests Peter as well. And we're told that this happened during the festival of unleavened bread, and that after he was arrested, Peter was just put in prison and guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Now that is a lot of people to guard him, but if you remember, Peter has already been released from prison in a miraculous way. So perhaps Herod has probably heard about this, and he is not wanting to take any chances. And he intended to bring Peter out for public trial after the Passover. Now, this would not have been a trial to decide, is he guilty or not? This would have been a trial to determine how is he going to be sentenced. They had already determined that he was guilty and was deserving of execution. They just now needed to have the specific charges that they were going to say were the reason for it. We're told in verse 5 that Peter was in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. And I don't think we should hear this and say, the church didn't pray for James. I'm sure they also were earnestly praying for James at the time he was in prison as well. But this story is about Peter and about how God is about to intervene here. And we could talk a little bit about what happens whenever we don't receive the miracle we're praying for. I think that's probably exactly what happened in the case of James. He was a prominent leader in the church, and they would have been praying for his release as well, but he wasn't released. It was time for him to drink that cup that Jesus had promised he would drink. But for Peter, there's a different plan. And something different is about to happen. So the church is earnestly praying to God for him. And when we hear this word earnestly, I think we can hear vigilant, unending, almost like if they were having this prayer vigil that was continuing day and night, all of this time while Peter is in prison. And so the night before Peter is coming to trial, he's asleep. So Peter, in the midst of this crazy time, he's in prison and he is just asleep, chained between two soldiers with sentries standing guard at the entrance. And suddenly an angel of the Lord appears and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Now, Peter was so deeply asleep that the angel actually had to shake him awake, strike him awake. And the light didn't wake him up. The light in the cell, or just all of a sudden that there was an angel there. None of those things woke him up. The angel actually had to touch him, to strike him, to get him to wake up. I think this picture of Peter at peace, sleeping peacefully in the midst of a very real trial where he is facing quite possibly his own death. He's just asleep and at peace. But the angel tells him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter does. And he says, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me out." But Peter has no idea that this is actually happening. He thinks he's seeing a vision. Now, Peter's had experience with visions. We talked about his vision of the sheet that comes down from heaven. We talked about that in our video last time. But this is no vision. The angel actually leads him out. The doors open. He leads him out of the prison. And it was once they get past these gates and into the city, they walk the length of one street and the angel leaves him. And Peter all of a sudden realizes, oh, this isn't a vision. This is actually happening. Here I am in the city. I was in prison. Now I'm not. So he goes to where the church is. It says when he had realized that the angel had rescued him and he wanted to go to the church because he knows they're praying for him, he goes to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked on the outer entrance and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. And when she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." I love this scene because here this woman, Rhoda, comes to the door and she's so surprised. She just forgets everything and just leaves poor Peter standing out there right outside the door. She has no way of knowing anything about what he has just gone through. She doesn't know if anybody is chasing him. Has he escaped in this dramatic fashion? But either way, she just leaves him standing on the stoop waiting to come in. So he has to keep persistently knocking because when she goes in to tell the church, they are like, "That's crazy. No, you haven't seen Peter. That's impossible." And they say it must be his angel. Or they're saying, it must be his angel. They're thinking like his guardian angel. And so they're not thinking that she actually was seeing Peter with some representation of him or some other celestial being, and they just don't believe her. But Peter keeps knocking persistently, and they finally opened the door and they saw him, and Peter tells them what happens and then gives them a message to James and the other brothers and sisters about this. Now, this James is James, the brother of Jesus, who will take a prominent leadership role in the church in Jerusalem going forward. And then he leaves and he goes underground and is in hiding, obviously, because he knows that Herod and all of his henchmen are going to be looking for him as soon as they realize what has happened. And I think it's so interesting because here we have this divine rescue, and Peter at first doesn't believe it's actually happening. He thinks it's a vision. And then we have the church who is earnestly praying for him. Their initial reaction is, no, that's not what's going on. You're seeing an angel. And they're also surprised. And it made me think about how often do we miss God's rescue, or are we caught off guard by God's provision? And maybe something we've been praying for a long time, and then we're surprised when God intervenes or God does something. And it just kind of gave me pause to think about how often do I miss what God is doing in my midst. Now, hopefully I would not miss being released from prison. And Peter ultimately didn't miss being released from prison, and neither the church. They finally figured it out. But I think that there's something for us to think about being aware of what God is doing in our midst and how he is at work in our lives, what he is doing, how he's intervening, how he is answering our prayers. Sometimes I think we forget to look for those things and see how God is at work. So I encourage you with that this week. So in the morning, back to our story, there was all of this commotion, as you can imagine, at the prison because the soldiers realize there's no Peter and they have zero explanation. And so Herod does what any king would do. He holds them responsible after they can't find Peter, and then he questions them, and then he orders that they're executed. And then we're told the end of chapter 12, we are told a little bit about what happens to Herod. Remember, I told you he doesn't rule for very long. 37 to 43 AD is all the length of his rule. And it says that he goes down from Judea to Caesarea, or went from Judea to Caesarea, and he stays there. And he had this interaction with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and he did something that they had wanted, and they are so overjoyed that they begin to laud him and praise him as a god. And instead of saying, no, don't, I am not God, all of these things, he is struck down for allowing them to praise him in this way. If we look at verse 23, it says, immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. So we see here that Herod is immediately judged for setting himself up as God, allowing himself to be praised like God, instead of giving God the praise. And it says the angel of the Lord struck him down. He's immediately held responsible for that. And so that is why Herod's reign was so short. And that is how this section ends. Verse 25 starts us off with the story of Barnabas and Saul. And that is where we're going to head off next week, because at this point in Acts, we're about to take a shift and the story is going to focus on Paul and his travels. So I hope you will join me again next week, and we will tackle Acts 13, and we will start our journeys with Paul. So I'll see you then. Bye.